While Canada is a nation state that embraces immigration, it does come with some serious challenges. For example, the pressure on schools to help the many new immigrant children who may not speak English or French. Many schools have had to request increased funding for ESL programs in order to help these students learn English. Often, refugee students come with emotional stress from the conditions they've experienced before coming to Canada and can even show signs of post traumatic stress disorder. And cultural differences can cause conflicts. For example, in many cultures, direct eye contact is seen as disrespectful, while in a Canadian classroom, if you don't make eye contact with the person who's talking to you, that could be considered quite rude. Another challenge can be the integration of immigrants into our communities. Canada does not have a policy of requiring immigrants to assimilate into the mainstream. In fact, our Multiculturalism Act requires that the government provide supports for the expression of different cultures. But that can also mean that new immigrants move into communities like Little Italy or Chinatown and don't really become part of the mainstream society. In fact, my own great grandmother, who lived in Canada for over 50 years, never really mastered the English language because she could speak Italian with the other immigrants living nearby. And our government policy of reasonable accommodation states that we must consider the various religious and cultural differences when applying certain regulations. For example, when the RCMP uniform was changed to allow members to wear a turban instead of the Stetson hat, or when soccer rules were changed to allow certain religious headgear like the hijab, this is considered reasonable accommodation. But while our commitment to multiculturalism makes us a world leader in race relations, many Canadian born citizens are starting to worry about feeling alienated in their own country, even though the dominance of the Anglo-Saxon Christian majority is still very strong. Just check out these statistics. But overall, Canada's multicultural immigration policies are proving to be very successful. In other countries like France, England, the Netherlands, and Sweden, there have been violent conflicts between immigrant communities and the mainstream society. While some say this is due to the violent aspects of various cultures, the fact is most social scientists agree the biggest contributing factor is not ethnic differences, but economic disparity. Most immigrants are pushed to a new country with the promises of a better life. Remember the push and pull? But then they find that racism, legislation, it makes it so hard for them to experience that promise of a better life. So as long as Canadians see the value in our immigrant population and provide them with the opportunities to succeed in Canada, we should be able to avoid these same conflicts. When immigrants come to Canada, they are protected by the same laws as everyone else, but they may not have the same rights and freedoms. For example, while most of the Charter of Rights and Freedoms does protect immigrants from things like discrimination based on race or sex and the right to a fair trial, immigrants don't have the right to vote in elections or participate in the government because they're not yet citizens of the country. They might not also have full access to our universal health care system or other social programs like employment insurance or welfare. And while most immigrants do want to become citizens, not all immigrants will in fact become Canadians. For example, my husband has chosen to not become a Canadian citizen. He's what's known as a landed immigrant or permanent resident. Even though he moved here when he was just over 10 years old, he still feels very proud to be a citizen of the United Kingdom and has chosen to keep that citizenship. He also admits he really doesn't want to study for a test and pay a bunch of money to write the test, even though his wife could help him study because she's a social teacher. This can cause some Canadians to question whether we should allow the landed and permanent resident status. If someone has lived here for most of their lives, shouldn't they feel that loyalty to Canada instead of a country they don't even live in? And how do the immigration laws impact Canada's Francophone communities? Francophones were one of the three founding nations in Canada, along with the Aboriginal peoples and the English. While the French were the majority European settlers early in Canada's colonial history, they're now the minority, and an increasing number of immigrants to Canada continues to threaten their linguistic and cultural heritage. For example, more immigrants to Canada can speak English than can speak French. Therefore, the province of Quebec has been given special privileges to help them protect their culture with the Canada-Quebec Accord. This allows Quebec to attract Francophone immigrants to their province and require immigrants to send their children to French language schools. I was surprised one day to be walking down a street in Paris and I saw the Quebec flag, so I went to investigate. It was a Quebec immigration office, not a Canada immigration office. I found this very interesting, but I could understand why Quebec would want to attract immigrants from France to their province. One of the other founding nations of Canada is our Aboriginal peoples. So how does immigration impact them? Today, First Nations groups are less than 5% of the population, and with increasing numbers of immigrants, this ratio could continue to decrease. Aboriginal leaders argue that when there are such high levels of poverty, poor education, health problems, and unemployment for Aboriginal peoples, immigrants can be seen as putting more stresses on the problems they're facing. First Nations leaders argue that we should be improving the quality of life for those within our country before we seek to encourage others to come into our country. They state that when the government is focused on helping immigrants, that means the focus is being taken away from things like the high level of unemployment on native reserves. Another issue is urban sprawl. Most immigrants move to the cities, as there's more job opportunities and cultural groups there. But as cities grow, they can put pressure on First Nations lands. Just look at how Calgary is starting to grow around the Tsuut'ina Reserve. And greater stresses are being put on agencies like addiction counseling, family services, subsidized housing, and even university scholarships for minority groups. And since immigration is a federal issue, what role do the provinces play? The Provincial Nomination Program allows the provinces to specify which jobs should get more points awarded to attract specific skills to their province. On average, Alberta attracts about 8% of the total number of immigrants, and our government wants to attract more to fill the jobs like in northern Alberta's oil patch. As you can see here, we need immigrants to come and help fill all of the jobs that Alberta has to offer. So as you can see, there are many things to consider when creating laws relating to Canada's immigration policies. How do we best meet the needs of Canadians, as well as the new citizens we're attracting to live in our country?